Another thing you looked at in quite a lot of detail was the use of younger players and sort of the average age of the squads, and that's something that Slot right now is doing very successfully and has done during his entire coaching career. It feels like he often developed players and got the best out of youngsters, which, as we know, Liverpool's squad by and large now is very young. We've seen Javel Quanta, as you mentioned, Conor Bradley, Jadon Dan, Stefan Bajcetic, less so this year, but we've seen a lot of youngsters come through and really succeed under Klopp, and that feels like something Slot could also continue.
Yeah, I mean, at Feyenoord, there's obviously an element, and I think I mentioned it in the article, of that he's kind of had to give youngsters the chance, because Feyenoord are unashamedly a selling club. You know, they're not as big as PSV and Ajax, or not as rich as them, so they can't. They don't have the same turnover of players either, or they hadn't done in the past. That was one of the big things that Slot actually sort of brought in, was that Feyenoord, their main issue was they had a very good academy, but they didn't really develop players. Obviously not so that hardly anyone does to the same extent that Ajax do, but even PSV were having more joy with their academy, bringing players through and then selling them on for big money. Feyenoord weren't making that much money from theirs. So Slot came in and, initially with his first squad, he lost a lot of players at the end of his first summer, and the club couldn't necessarily just go out and buy a load more because they needed the money they were raising from those players. So they replaced a lot of them with younger players. And yeah, Slot didn't mind giving them opportunities, giving them plenty of minutes and developing them. And then all of a sudden they started selling these players for much, much more money. And that's sort of enabled them to be able to go on and buy better players. I mean, it's still the case there. I think their highest fee ever paid is €8 million for, I think it was David Hanco. So yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with in terms of the resources he had available to him. So that's why he went. It's mostly use young players, but it shows that he's not afraid to. Like obviously Klopp has this year, again partially out of necessity because of injuries, but yeah, hasn't been afraid to turn to the academy when needed. And I'm sure Slot has like everyone else has seen the immense amount of talent coming through Liverpool's academy at the moment, and is probably thinking, brilliant. Like he doesn't necessarily need to come in and buy a ton of players. He can develop them. They can supplement the squad. You mentioned Stefan Bajcetic, obviously, who's missed so much of this season. He looks like the kind of player I think Slot could have a lot of joy with. Where he brought in Mats FIFA from Excelsior in his first summer. I think it was 2022. And he was not as young as Bajcetic, but I think he was about 21, 22 when he came in. And he just come from the second tier, and he was a relative nobody, but Slot had seen something in him, and within a few months he turned him into one of the best defensive midfielders in the Eredivisie. And he's someone else now who they brought in pretty cheap at a young age, and 2 years on they're looking to sell him for 30, 40 million. So yeah, I think he's gonna have a lot of fun with our academy.
Yeah, that's the plan. David Hansko, you mentioned, obviously now famously a Liverpool fan, after coming out and saying that he's always followed Liverpool, not angling for a move at all. I was going to ask you a little bit later about sort of players who could thrive, or the real winners, if you like, from potentially Arne Slot becoming manager, whether it be formationally, whether we might see, I don't know, somebody sort of emerge from somewhere who maybe not is quite at the forefront yet, and likewise, or vice versa, rather, any losers potentially from Arne Slot and who doesn't quite fit the system and stuff like that. You mentioned Stefan Bajcetic there. I mean, you mentioned the sheer amount of midfielders that we have a moment ago. Is there anyone in particular that you're looking at and going, I don't see where you fit? Or again, on the flip side, you could really benefit from having Slot in charge?
In terms of not fitting, I wouldn't necessarily say so. I mean, I think there's going to be, even though I think he's done brilliantly this season in the main, I think there are going to be questions about Wataru Endo in the summer. Just the fact that, completely understandably, because he's played a lot of football, obviously had the Asian Cup in the middle. His form has, like quite a few players, his form has tailed off a bit recently. Whether or not, again, with a manager who's going to be playing a very intense pressing style, very, very, very hard work. I mean, Endo was a very hard-working player, but obviously in his early 30s now, and maybe has the pace of the Premier League caught up with him a little bit this season. So I think there's probably going to be a few question marks there. There's also that with Slot's midfielders, I mentioned FIFA, Quinton Timber as well, who's done very well from this season. He doesn't tend to play with someone who is maybe more of an out-and-out six. I mean, again, not throwing any shade at Wataru Endo here, but he needs his midfielders to be able to really join in with attacks to pass short and long. Winning the ball back is very important, but it's not sort of the be all and end all. So Endo's already proven doubters wrong before, so I'm sure he can again. But there might be the odd question mark there. Other than that, I think not in terms of his ability, but I think there will be question marks about where Slot would want to play Dominic Szoboszlai. I mean, I think there's still question marks now, even under Klopp, of what his best position is and where he's best utilised. But in Slot's system, unless he does move to a 4-3-3 and his 4-2-3-1, I sort of, again, touched on it in the article that probably of the 3 midfield positions, it's actually probably the 10 that would suit him more than any other, because I think you've seen, obviously, when he's higher up the pitch, when he's closest to the goal and he can get those shots away, he can be quite a nuisance. But also in terms of what the double pivot do, I've not really seen that from Szoboszlai this season, although arguably it's not really been his role, so maybe he could do it. But also there's just a lot of other players who are more suited to it. McAllister, Endo, I say Jones probably is, Gravenberch. So I think Szoboszlai would probably struggle to get into the double pivot, but he could probably make the 10 position his own, maybe. In terms of players who could benefit under him, again, looking at the 10 position, Harvey Elliott's development this season has been so impressive. Another young player who's still got a lot of developing to do. So with a new manager, with new ideas, who's got history of developing young players, Elliott just seems like an absolute sponge at the moment in terms of just every single game. You just see new things that he's learning and picking up. So yeah, I'll be excited to see how Elliott gets on under him. And it's an obvious one, but Ryan Gravenberch, obviously, the fact that he's young, that he's Dutch, that he's not necessarily had the best first season, but he's not had regular starts, not regular games, really. And the last, obviously, he gets his goal against Fulham, and then I thought he played very well. One of our better players on Saturday. So I think you're already seeing with slightly more game time, his development. And so, yeah, it's probably a bit obvious to say, well, the manager's the same nationality, so they're bound to get along. So yeah, I think Gravenberch and Elliott in particular are ones to look out for.